Okay, guys, so it's early Sunday morning. There's 56 days left till Tekken. I tried to get my roll cage certified yesterday because I knew there was probably going to be some issues with it. Sure enough, there was. 57 days till drag week. Just tried to get my roll cage certified and it failed. So to add to the stress, now I get to cut out my roll cage and start all over again. Hope to see you guys there. So I've now got to cut out some of the bars, fix the cage, so I could try to get that certified correctly, but it's now something else I have to plan to do with the little bit of time I have left. So today, my main goal is to try to make this chassis a roller again. So as you can see, I got everything painted. The rear axle is still not together, but it's up in place. I've got the new axles there. I pressed in the bearings already. The backing plates are on, so all that's ready to go. I've got my pinion bearing race installed, and I machined down an old pinion bearing so that I can set my pinion depth, because I don't have the $1,000 Ford tool to do that, and I'm going to do it old school. I'm going to use the ring and pinion, some paint mark, and I'm going to set my pinion depth that way. So I've got to put that together. I've got to install my rear coilovers. That should be relatively straightforward. As you can see, I've got the fuel tank back in place. I've got my front K-member in place. I've got to put together my QA1 front coilover setup so I can get that in. And then I need to assemble my Wilwood front brakes so I can mount wheels on here so that I can actually get this thing to roll around. So I'm kind of in the point this morning where I have so much to do, I don't even know where to start. But I think I might start with just getting the rear coilovers here, so I'm not relying on this rope to hold my axle up. I don't want that thing falling on my head. So I'm just going to start time lapse, and I'm going to start putting stuff together. Alright guys, new day, new shirt, new parts going into the car. So today my plan is to get the rear axle assembled. I had to temporarily put in the center differentials so I can put the axles in, so I can move it out of the garage because I had to do some other work. And I was a little worried that it was going to damage the bearings on the end. So I already got the axles out of here. I'm going to take the carrier out. And since I don't have Ford's fancy pinion depth gauge, I'm going to have to do this old school. So I'm going to put in the pinion, and I'm going to put in the ring gear on the center carrier differential, mark it with paint, and I'm going to get my depth from the marks on the ring gear. What I did was I took a bearing, I'll show you guys here in a minute, and on a lathe I machined down the inner portion of the bearing so that I could slip this thing onto the pinion. That way I can easily take it in and out to find the shim thickness that I need to get the right contact area on my ring gear. So got a lot of parts here. Let me show you guys what I got going on, and then we'll start putting this differential together. All right, so real quick, here's the new pinion. Here's the bearing. As you can see, it slips on and off nice and easy. I know from looking up a lot of the specs, the spec is somewhere, or at least not the spec, but the consensus is that usually this takes between a 25 and a 32,000 shim. So I might start with a 25,000 shim just so I can get in the ballpark. But what I'm going to try to do is get my pinion depth so that my mark is in the correct location on my ring gear. So what I have to do first is I have to get the differential out of there, put my new ring gear on, get my pinion in, and then I can mark this up and start figuring out what my thickness needs to be. I have from Ford Performance the shim kit. It also comes with a set of new ring gear bolts. I have two old ones here that I'm going to use to draw this up into the differential so I don't damage the new ones. I have my new pinion bearing for the outer portion. I also obviously have a new bearing for here once I figure out what the thickness shim needs to be. I got my mark paint here, got my other shims that are needed, the crush sleeve, the nut washer, all that good stuff. This is the rest of the parts for the differential, and my my yoke here for the right splines on the Ford differential so that I can adapt my drive shaft to that rear axle. So I have to admit, it's a little weird putting Ford parts into my Pontiac. Growing up, I built this car specifically because everyone I knew had Mustangs, and I did not want to be that same Mustang person, so I built a third gen. Obviously, I was slower than everyone else because, let's be real, I mean, Mustangs were just faster. But I can't argue with the fact that that 8.8 is way stronger than what I had in there. So, here we go. Ford Performance parts going into my Chevy. I thought it was supposed to be the other way around, though. Built Ford tough with Chevy stuff. Now it's Chevy tough with Ford stuff? I don't know. Comment below. Let me know what you guys think. Alright, so it's been a minute since I've done this, but it's still pretty straightforward. I inspected the ring gear here quick, and I noticed there was a few spots that had, big slags of metal. So I tried knocking them off. They can come off. I hit them with the grinder so I can grind them smooth. The last thing you want is to have any kind of metal that's going to break off to get loose in here and then destroy your gear set. Like I said, I'm going to use two of my old bolts. These are cleaned, but I'm going to use them to draw this up into the carrier here, and I'm going to try to center this the best I can here, and then use the bolt to get it started. And then I'm just going to bring this thing up using hand tools so I can get it all the way up and seated. Okay, now that I have these two up, I can install my new bolts. The instructions call for red Loctite on there, but the bolts already have red Loctite installed on them. So I'm going to run these down, and I'm going to torque these down to 100 foot-pounds. The spec is 97 to 102 foot-pounds. So I feel like 100 is a good compromise here. Okay, ring gear installed, torque down. Now what I'm going to do before I put this in is I got to get the pinion in. So like I said, I bought the Ford Performance installation kit. So it comes with a various selection of shims, and comes with a new crush sleeve,
new nut, the pinion thickness washers, which is what I need. So we'll set this stuff out of the way for now. And I'm going to grab the vernier real quick, and we're going to measure these up to see what the thickness is. And like I said, I'm probably going to start with 25, 27 thousandths, somewhere in that range. 15. So I'm going to go with a 15 and a 10. This should give me 25. And this is going to sit behind this bearing that I ground down so I can get it on and off easily. And we're going to install the pinion here, and then put the carrier in, mark it with some paint, check to see what our contact patch is, determine if we need to increase or decrease the shim thickness, and once we have that established, then I'll press on the proper bearing and move forward with assembling it. So let me get the pinion in, we'll get the carrier in, and then check our mesh. Okay guys, so off camera I did some quick measurements. I used the old side shims that came in the differential. This is probably never touched since it was made at Ford. But what I was trying to do was, I got these shims sort of roughed in here. You can see I still have a little bit of play here, but I wanted to get the backlash at least a little closer to where it should be. I don't have any preload on the bearings, obviously, since I can move it back and forth so much. But what I'm really looking for right now is just the contact patch from the pinion. Like I said, I don't have the pinion depth tool, so I have to rely on the old method of just marking the gears here with a little paint and rotating it both on the drive side and the coast side and looking to where the pattern lies. That'll tell me how much shim I need to either add or subtract from behind the bearing and the pinion, and then I can start shimming this thing once I have that close, so I can get my backlash where it needs to be, and then ultimately my bearing preload. So I'm going to put some of this marking compound that comes with the Ford kit. It's really just some bright yellow paint here, and we're going to mark up a few of these teeth. And basically when I go to rotate this thing, we're going to see where this pattern is on the tooth. So I want to know if it's too close to the toe, too close to the heel, and I want to pretty much get this centered on the tooth. And as we get closer to the pattern, I'll show you guys exactly what I'm looking for. Okay, so now that I have the teeth marked up a little bit, what I'm going to do is I'm going to rotate the pinion back and forth in this area. And then I'm going to look to see where my contact area is. So you can see now the paint is wiped off. It looks like it's coming a little bit towards the end here, not so much over there, but it looks pretty close. On the back side, it looks a little opposite. It's a little closer here, a little further away over there. I was going to try to film getting my pattern correct, but I have to admit it took me the better part of a day going back and forth trying to get the pattern where I wanted it. It is, even though I have bearings that just slip on and off of the pinion, it still is time consuming to take the carrier out, take the pinion out, change the shim, put everything back, check the backlash, check your pattern, make your changes, do it again. For whatever reason, it was pretty difficult to get the pattern where I wanted it. So also, I should point out, if you look online and search gear patterns, You'll see a bunch of nice little pictures that show you all kinds of, different pictures, and moving this will move that. I found a couple of images that were just plain wrong. The patterns they were saying, or at least showing, and then telling you either to change the pinion thickness or the backlash, were completely opposite of what it should have been. So, long story short, rather than you guys watching me do all this, there's a bunch of good videos on YouTube where you could see what your gear pattern should look like and what you need to adjust to get the pattern where you want it. Long story short, if your coast and your drive patterns are opposite ends of the tooth and you want to shift them either way, you need to increase or decrease your pinion depth so you get your patterns as close to the middle as possible. And then your backlash adjustment is really just going to move both of those either closer or further away from the toe and the heel. So obviously I got my patterns close to where I wanted them in the middle, and then what I did was I got my backlash set in such a way that the pattern is closer to the toe than the heel. And the reason for that is when the gear set is loaded, that pattern is going to move up closer to the heel. It's just the way the gears are going to mesh. And you generally want that for an axle that's going to see a lot of high-end torque. So I know that was a lot to say, but now everything is cleaned up again. I have my new bearing on my pinion with the proper shims, and now we're going to start by setting the pinion. Get my pinion in, get the outer bearing in, the seal. I even had to buy a new splash ring because for whatever reason I couldn't find mine. It's really just a small washer like this, goes in front of the bearing before the seal. And then we're going to torque this down. Well, not torque this down. We're going to set the pinion spinning preload, or the bearing preload, and we're going to do that by spinning and seeing what the turning torque is in inch-pounds. So I'll move the camera, we'll get this pinion in, and then we'll come back here and we'll get the carrier in. Okay, so now looking at the pinion side, first thing we need to do is we need to install our outer pinion bearing here, our oil slinger, and then everything is held in here with a new seal. So we'll get this tapped into place. Got my fancy seal installer here. It is a flange seal, so just make sure it's set all the way against, nice and flush. Once that's installed, put a little gear oil on the inner bearing. Make sure you put a new crush sleeve on. Crush sleeve is what's going to determine my bearing preload. Carefully get this guy in here. Install my new yoke. And always a new yoke nut. So these guys already have sealant on them. Get that guy started. And now I'm going to put on my holding tool I made so I can tighten this guy down, because it takes about 140 foot-pounds to crush that crush sleeve inside, and you need to crush that so you can set your pinion bearing preload. So I'm going to run this down, we'll get the tool on, and then we'll tighten this thing up slowly, measure it with a turning torque gauge until I get that sweet number. I think the new bearing is between 16 and 28 inch-pounds, so that's what we're aiming for by tightening this down. Okay, here's the tool I made. This is just so I can hold the pinion or the yoke while I'm tightening this thing down. So it's a pretty simple tool. 2 holes to bolt down to here. I cut in a square 1/2-inch drive hole here so I can hold it with a tool. I mean, you could just as easily drill 2 holes and weld a socket onto a plate like this if you want. Okay, so I've got the turning torque where I want it. It's roughly 22 inch-pounds. Gonna take off my holding tool. I actually use the torque arm to hold it. It's a lot easier than trying to hold it and tightening it with one person, because it takes a lot of effort. But I've got my turning torque gauge set about 22 pounds. We're going to rotate this guy. And there it is. So it's set at 22. I'm getting about 0 on the gauge. So this setting is just for new bearings, so keep that in mind. This is for a new bearing set. If you're using used bearings, I believe the turning torque is somewhere between 8 and I want to say 15, maybe a little less. But now our pinion's set. Now I can go back and install the carrier. We're now ready to install our carrier unit with our ring gear. I already have my shims ready to go, sized with the right bearing preload. And I can tell you right now that these are not easy to get in. Of course, Ford has another special tool for this, but I do not have it. Alright, we'll go back to that. Okay, so these bolts are nice and clean. I put a little oil underneath the head of the bolt. That's going to aid in getting our torque specification. So right now I'm just running these down just to hold the carrier in place. And this is where it becomes tricky. Okay, install the other cap. Run it down. Make sure everything still springs freely. And now we're going to torque these bolts down to 100 foot-pounds. Okay, we'll do a sanity check here. We're going to check for our backlash. I have about 8 thousandths backlash, which is on the low end of the specification. It should be between 8 and 12, somewhere in there. Okay, and our last sanity check here, before this thing's fully buttoned up, is I'm going to mark a couple of the teeth here, and we're going to verify our pattern. And basically what we're going to do is we're going to rotate this from the pinion. I'm going to hold the ring gear so I have some load on it. Come back the other way. And we're going to check our pattern. So this is my drive side. I don't know if you can see it on camera, but it's basically centered in here. On the coast side, but same thing, it's centered in here. So I'm gonna call that a good pattern. They're about even. I mean, I probably could decrease the backlash a little bit, but I'm gonna leave that right where it is. All right, differential's in. Time to get these axles back in. My inner seal's already in. And now I can slide this right side axle in. I put a little grease on the inner seal just so it has some kind of lubricant before it gets oil. You need to be careful when you install these here. You don't want to damage the seal. The key part is to get it in the carrier. Okay. Get my backing plate on. Alright guys, quick rundown where we're at. Last you saw I was putting together the rear axle. I've got it all buttoned up. I took the time off camera to get my braking system all installed. Got my new rotors on, got my new e-brake pads in, new calipers. I do have to still work on the brackets for the emergency brake cable and also what holds the brake hose up top. I got my rear cover on, just got to put some fluid in here, but I would say the rear axle is pretty much complete now. At least now I can you know, put the wheels on it and roll this thing around as I needed. Got my yoke all ready. As soon as I can get this engine in, get the transmission in, drive shaft in, we should be in good shape. My dad also put together a lot of the front end, so we now have the brakes on, the brake hoses, so they're all in place. Got the steering drag link and tie rod ends all back into place. Right now everything's just sort of roughed by eyeball again, so I can move this thing in and out of the garage. Front sway bars in, Wonder bars in, and all this stuff is all nice and tight. I've been marking all the bolts with a little red paint so that I know everything's tight. Anything I don't see any red paint in, I know I need to go back and check. But I would say we're officially ready to start putting the engine together, and that's an exciting thing for me because I started taking the LS apart months ago, went to the machine shop, and then I got heavily involved with trying to get the rear axle together, transmission together. So now we're ready to start putting the engine together. I've got all the parts laid out here. I do need to drill my holes here for my LS7 style damper, so I'm trying to figure that out right now. Going to replace all the freeze plugs, wash the block again, and then start putting the engine together. I still have to go over the cylinder heads. I want to port these things out a little bit, unshroud the valves, clean up the intake ports a little bit and the exhaust port. Nothing crazy, just clean them up a little bit. But that's where we are right now. Like I said, the axle's together. Pretty happy about that. That was a lot of work. And hopefully the engine goes together much faster. Because as of right now, 58 days till tech day. And I've got a lot of boxes of parts yet. So I got to get to work.